Chapter 29. Did you just say you would teach me about attributes? Raon frowned, looking at Rimmer's disheveled hair and clothes. He didn't look trustworthy at all. You look like you are looking at a scammer. Rimmer giggled, bending forward slightly. You know, I'm pretty good at teaching, despite being a little bit lazy. That was true. His methods didn't help many children, but it at least guaranteed the development of the few. Stop doubting me and come on. Aren't we doing it here? Of course not. Get ready quickly and come with me. Understood. Raon went to his room and pulled out his outer garments. Today is an unlucky day, to see that pointy-eared bastard at daybreak. We see him every day, though. He left the annex building after he finished dressing. Where are we going? The North Grave Mountain. Rimmer pointed at the mountain soaring behind the annex building. It was a huge mountain surrounding the entire Sieghard estate, connected not only to the annex building, but also to the main building. Let's go. Okay. Following Rimmer, Raon climbed the mountain. Around here seems good. Rimmer stopped after about 20 minutes of climbing. The place looked like a vacant lot, since the ground was flat and there weren't any trees. Why did we come here? Raon's voice was indifferent, but he was actually prepared to react to anything Rimmer was going to do. You don't need to be so nervous. I just want you to feel it. Feel it? Yes. As Rimmer smiled, a dark green wind blew towards him. Trust me and stand still, right over there. Even if you tell me to trust you, His bangs fluttered in the wind, which resembled a spring's fragrance as it brushed away winter. Next was a cool wind that could only be felt in a forest in the summer, fanning his heated body from the climb. The third was winter. A cold wind pressed against his skin, chilling to his bones like a storm. Then the wind changed one more time. The dark green wind, which contained the 4 seasons, became a sharp blade and surrounded Raon. Using the wind, I wanted to create a blade that could protect my lord. From the waves of green wind, Rimmer's voice could be heard. Bam! It was a storm of blades that could rip apart anything nearby. However, Raon stepped neither backwards nor forwards. This is the wind I've chosen. Raon stood still and felt the green storm. Whoosh! The fierce wind's pressure disappeared, and Rimmer gave a sly smile. You weren't scared? You weren't planning to attack me. You also told me to not move. You really aren't like a normal 13-year-old, no matter how hard I look. Rimmer snickered and flicked his finger, causing the lingering wind to disappear completely. A cultivation technique with an affinity can be more powerful than other cultivation techniques, but it is also difficult to learn. Following his gentle voice, the wind waved like it was dancing. I could feel the wind from birth because I'm an elf, but you're different. You're human. It must be even more difficult for you, as your mana circuit is filled with ice. Indeed. Raon nodded. The 10,000 Flames cultivation was a sophisticated technique, but it was even more difficult for him to learn because he was controlling an energy opposing the ice he'd been born with. There are different kinds of wind. It can be warm, cold, or sharp. I'd wanted a sort of wind that could pierce through anything, and I achieved it. Rimmer's expression was confident, rather than bitter, as he spoke of his now out-of-reach former achievements. You must also find it. Try to form an image of the fire you'll have. An image. And in order to create that image, the most important thing is to feel that affinity. But this is the north. It's difficult to find a proper flame unless I set the mountain on fire. If you do that, then our heads will fly together. Rimmer giggled, then waved his hand. A green wind appeared from his feet. Follow me. Where are we going this time? Since you felt the wind, let's go see the fire now. Raon ran along the mountain trails, following Rimmer. After about 20 minutes of running, Rimmer started to slow down. A thick, heated haze was rising up from the cold forest, as if a hot wind had passed through. The change in temperature was making him itchy. Is it coming from there? There was a gray kiln attached to a house made of red bricks. The heat was coming from the kiln. It's hot. The north was the coldest place on the continent, yet he felt hot. That was how much heat was emitting. Hey, old man. I'm here. Rimmer strode ahead as if it were his own home and Raon followed behind. The heat grew stronger the closer they got to the kiln. His clothes started to become drenched in sweat. The ice in his mana circuit was trembling because of the unfamiliar heat. Raon frowned at the worsening pain and entered the house. There was only one appliance inside the house. A furnace. It was the furnace from the kiln, which was emitting enough heat to make the whole house look distorted. A wrinkled old man with completely white hair was sitting in front of the furnace. Despite being completely drenched in sweat, he wasn't taking his eyes off it. Is this really the flame that I used to know? Raon swallowed. He'd seen many flames throughout his previous life, from the bonfire he'd made himself to the advanced fire magic used by a mage. However, none of those seemed to match up to the heat created by the flame soaring in the furnace. Swoosh! The ice in his mana circuit started to scream, and the mana around him started to move, following the flow of the 10,000 flames cultivation, which he hadn't even acquired yet. The sound of a soaring flame reverberated through his ears, and the waves of heat made his heartbeat fiercer. He couldn't take his eyes off the furnace, as if he were bewitched by it. Old man, you're always so focused. Rimmer dusted off his hand after soothing the heat with his green wind. The heat is dying down because of you. It looks like another failure anyway. Coo. After glaring at Rimmer, the old man sighed and threw an unknown gray mass inside the furnace. Wish. The intense heat, hot enough to melt the ground, was subdued. The flame grew weaker, to the point that it merely felt warm. Ah! Raon unconsciously sighed. As soon as the flame disappeared, the flow of the 10,000 flame cultivation running through his mana circuit dissipated. The regret made his fingers tremble. What did you bring today? What is that thing? The old man frowned, looking at Raon. The lowered corners of his lips and raised eyebrows showed his stubborn personality. Wow! That thing? How dare you address the head of house's grandson like that? Rimmer was preaching about manners, despite always talking however he felt. Poof. I'm just a retired old man. Unless the head of house comes personally. He started to stand up, then stopped after seeing Raon's eyes and hair. Blonde and red eyes? And that face. He looks like the head of house, right? Raon looks a lot more handsome, though. The old man nodded in agreement. I'm Vulcan. You should leave if you are expecting manners from me. Vulcan. Raon controlled his expression, looking at the old man's blurred eyes. It was as if he was looking at burned-out coal. I didn't expect him to be here. He was a blacksmith, renowned throughout the world under the title of the continent's blacksmith. He was famous for having forged Glenn Sieghart's true heavenly sword. However, his last known activity was 30 years ago, and he hadn't created another famous sword since the true heavenly sword. I'm Raon Sieghart. Raon bowed, without minding Vulcan's manners. It was his way of showing respect to a giant who'd reached the end of a road. Vulcan's disgruntled expression softened slightly at his polite greeting. Did you tell him about? Not at all. Rimmer shook his head, then turned around. This old man is Sieghart's blacksmith. Retired. Yes, retired blacksmith. Anyway, he's been igniting flames here for over 10 years now. Rimmer turned, pointing at the now extinguished furnace. This is where you can feel the hottest and fiercest flame in the north. A cultivation technique for fire attributes, huh? Vulcan frowned after hearing Rimmer's explanation. Is that why you brought him here? It's because you're managing the fire here throughout the year. There's no other place where you can feel a proper flame. How about the blacksmith's workshop? That place stands out too much. being noticed before learning that cultivation technique won't do him any good. Why not? Because Raon is Sylvia's son. Upon hearing that he was Sylvia's son, Vulcan's eyes skimmed over Raon once again. Ha! He turned around and watched the orange flame. He looked like he was considering it. I won't disturb you. Please allow me to feel the fire. Raon bowed to Vulcan once more. I want to see it again. Vulcan's flame made his heart beat harder and his mana circuit waver. He wanted to feel the breath of that flame once again. I'm just making charcoal. Charcoal? A golden charcoal that can generate a much more powerful heat than white or black charcoal. If you aren't going to disturb me making golden charcoal, I don't care what you do. Thank you very much. Raon bowed once again. Vulcan turned his head, embarrassed by Raon's increasing courtesy. It's nice that he accepted. Raon, cultivate the 10,000 flames cultivation here during daybreak training. Since nobody lives around here, and this old man doesn't know about cultivation techniques, you don't need to worry. Understood. Raon nodded. Just as Rimmer said, he couldn't feel any mana from Vulcan. Old man, we need to talk. Rimmer led Vulcan out of the house, pleased that everything was going well. You're still as kind as ever, old man. Rimmer grinned, his arm resting on Vulcan's shoulder. I'll bring you some good stuff if you take good care of Raon. Do you like fruit wines? It's not because of you. Ha! The flame in the furnace burst when that boy arrived, to a point that the coals were ruined because of it. Vulcan furrowed his eyebrows, looking at the yellow, burned-out coal. It's been a long time since I last got this color. So, the old man felt it too. I'm a blacksmith. The flame that I've been seeing my entire life wavered. There's no way I wouldn't know. Vulcan's gray eyes, the color of burned-out ashes, shone. The boy's breath contains the power to move a flame. The next morning, Raon ran towards Vulcan's charcoal kiln before sunrise. Thanks to the red heat rising up in the dark mountain, it wasn't difficult to find the charcoal kiln. Despite hearing Raon's footsteps, Vulcan kept watching the furnace instead of looking at him. The sight of him keeping his eyes on the furnace, despite sweating so heavily, emphasized the fact that he didn't gain the title of the continent's blacksmith for nothing. This heat. Raon stood where the heat was the strongest. The intense wave of heat rolled up his clothes and flared up his skin. The ice frantically started to stab his mana circuit. Huff, huff. He grit his teeth against the incoming pain, gray steam leaving his mouth. It was so painful that he wanted to run away immediately, but his heartbeat was raging with excitement from the flame. He was exhilarated. Following the breath of fire that he felt through the pain, he recited the fundamentals of the 10,000 flame cultivation. The hot breath was added to the inhaled mana, and the cloudy air was exhaled from his body. Raon closed his eyes. He rotated the ring of fire and practiced the 10,000 flames cultivation. Whoosh! When he reached the peak of his concentration, the pain disappeared and the exhilaration from the heat filled his heart. Vulcan turned around. The movements of his hands gentled as he watched Raon breathe with his eyes closed. Crackle! The sound of burning wood crackled from the furnace. 3 months had passed since Raon started to cultivate aura at Vulcan's charcoal kiln. Since he'd gotten used to it, he could now reach the charcoal kiln in 10 minutes. The flame, which had become even fiercer than the first time he'd seen, was pressing down on the place. The kiln's surroundings were filled with heat ripples the size of a finger. He doesn't change. Vulcan didn't turn around or speak, despite knowing that he'd arrived. He just focused on watching the furnace. Raon approached the furnace, trying to not make a sound. Each time he took a step towards the furnace, heated air surrounded his entire body. It was difficult to breathe, and his back was drenched in sweat. The ice in his mana circuit growled like the jaws of a savage beast. Huff! It was a pain he couldn't get used to, but Raon smiled. Looking at the flame was now enough to make him excited. Fire! Fire! He'd started to understand. After spending time alongside the fire and following Rimmer's advice, he could finally understand what fire was. People said fire was the scariest and the strongest attribute, but it was the most stable of all attributes if handled properly. Raon took one more step towards it, while feeling the heat scorching his skin. The energy from his not yet acquired 10,000 flames technique woke by itself, attracting the heat that was scorching the earth. The flame inside the furnace burst up like a devil's tongue, as if it was reacting to the mana. Ha! Raon exhaled the remaining air from his lung and took in the well-baked mana. He guided the boiling mana towards his mana circuit. The ice, trying to run away from the heat, followed the flow of the 10,000 flames cultivation, and dragged it into the energy center. An image. Once the cultivation stabilized, Raon remembered Rimmer's advice. He'd told him he needed to draw an image. The fire I need. He thought about his objective. It was to make Sylvia a part of the direct line once again, and to cut Darius Roberts' head off. It was going to be as difficult as walking through darkness, or he couldn't see anything. He needed a flame that could become a torch to illuminate his way, a flame that could become a sword to defeat savage beasts. He needed a flame that wouldn't extinguish, even if it snowed or rained. A flame that didn't extinguish, no matter what. That was the flame he chose. As he drew the clear image of his flame, lightning struck his mind and his heart throbbed with life. The mana circuit repeated its expansion and contraction, stimulating the frozen ice. Heat that was running wild, like lava melting the glacier, ran through his mana circuit and finally reached his energy center. Whoosh! The moment the energy from the 10,000 flames cultivation was being condensed into a sphere of aura, a frightening voice resounded in his mind. It's the King of Essence's time to shine. Spine-chilling goosebumps appeared up Raon's back, despite his trance. Chapter 30. Clench. Raon grit his teeth. Wrath. As he was interrupted just before forming an aura in his trace, the aura started to scatter. Gore. Raon focused and tried to condense the aura from the 10,000 flames cultivation as it began to dissipate. Just as he was about to force it to settle, a coldness rushed at him. I told you. Wrath's voice was jeered at him. The King of Essence will target you when you are in your weakest state. Gore. He was right. Wrath did warn him that he would attack at the most dangerous moment. To be honest, Raon had somewhat expected it to happen. However, he completely forgot about Wrath while in his trance. I'm only getting started. Wrath exploded his massive coldness, aimed at him. Raon shivered, facing the coldness that seemed to even freeze his cold sweat. He wanted to open his eyes immediately because of the bone-freezing pain. However, he couldn't do that. It risked reversing the flow of his mana, which would incapacitate him. You bastard. He forgot, since Wrath had been tamed for a while, that he wasn't his ally. He wasn't just a devil, but a king of devildom. He seemed to be trying to eat away his entire soul by breaking his body. Whirl! As Wrath's coldness grew more powerful, the ice in his mana circuit started to reverberate. Ugh! He groaned in pain. It felt like his skin and bones were being split apart. The extreme coldness and wrath started to corrode his mind. It's over. Wrath's cold voice contained exhilaration instead of anger. Your body and mind now belong to the King of Essence. Just as he said, Raon's whole body was being filled with that extreme cold. He was losing his senses due to the extreme pain, and he felt like he would faint at any moment. Gore! Raon bit his tongue. The pain allowed him to regain his senses for an instant, like a bucket of cold water. Think. Wrath's coldness had already covered his entire body. He could take control of it at any moment now. I can't stop the 10,000 flames cultivation. It was too late to use the ring of fire, since Wrath's coldness was going to engulf his body and mind before the ring started to rotate. I need to reach a breakthrough. Raon tried to withstand it by circulating the 10,000 flames cultivation. It was a precarious situation, like hanging over a cliff with a single rope. Just give up. Your body is already mine. We won't know until I try. It's an unnecessary struggle, like that old man who ignites the charcoal kiln every day. Charcoal kiln. Charcoal kiln. There was a way that he could survive. Clench. Raon clenched his fist and gathered the mana with all his remaining power. Whoosh. The mana flowing into him wasn't nature's mana, heated up by the charcoal kiln, but the mana inside the kiln itself. Bastard! What are you doing? Last-ditch struggle. Yes, it was a last-ditch struggle. He'd gotten enough of dying without being able to do anything in his previous life. He didn't want to die in vain in his current life, no matter what. Rustle. From the ceiling of the charcoal kiln, covered in stiff clay, a rustling sound of leaves could be heard. You bastard! Stop it! Ugh! The coldness from wrath grew stronger, powerful enough to freeze to his bones. Despite being unable to feel anything in his limbs, he withstood it with the very last of his strength and inhaled for the last time. Crack! With an earth-shattering sound, a tremendous heat burst into the air. Flame was bursting out from inside the charcoal kiln. Huff! Raon instantly inhaled the heat, as if he'd never taken a breath before. The heat was inhaled not only through his nose and mouth, but the pores of his skin. His entire body pushed back the coldness. It was an overwhelming power, like lava running through his veins. Whap! Wrath's coldness vanished like a spring snow facing the turbulent waves of heat. What is this? Wrath, disappear! Raon kept controlling the 10,000 flames cultivation, chewing his lip. He also rounded up the tremendous amount of ice that his mana circuit had melted down, guiding it towards his energy center. Whoosh! The energy of 10,000 flames cultivation, which used to be like a dying flame, formed into a clear shape upon taking in the heat from the charcoal kiln. Whirr! And that wasn't all. A pure white energy was condensed like a bead, right next to the aura from the 10,000 flames cultivation, taking a clear shape. It was the ice of the frost that used to fill his mana circuit. Damn it! Huff! Without paying attention to Wrath screaming in anger, Raon organized all the heat in the air and the ice inside his body. It took extreme concentration. Withstanding Wrath's interruption, Raon fell into a second trance. Ha! Vulcan breathed out heavily, placing a piece of firewood in the furnace. Watching the furnace, where the firewood was immediately set ablaze, he recalled the past. It's already been 30 years. It had been 30 years since he made his last masterpiece, the true heavenly sword. After offering the best sword of his life to Glenn Zighart, he thought his journey had come to an end. Since he'd obtained so much wealth, the kind that wouldn't run out for the rest of his life, he decided to retire and enjoy the rest of his life. However, he was sitting in front of the fire when he came to his senses. He didn't need to wake up early, nor ignite the furnace. And yet, he kept heading towards the blacksmith. I am absolutely stuck. He was still stuck in the moment that he'd created the true heavenly sword. I can't stop it. He'd created countless swords and contributed greatly to Zighart. Its leader, Glenn Zighart, one of the strongest of the continent, was using his sword. Although his name would be passed down in history even if he retired, he couldn't sit still. He couldn't stop holding his hammer, nor stay away from the fire. There was only one reason that he was hesitating so much. Even though he wanted to keep working, he wasn't confident in creating something that would surpass the true heavenly sword that he'd offered Glenn. In his indecision, he ignited a sloppy fire and used his hammer. All he could feel was emptiness. That's why I made this kiln. About 10 years ago, he'd started creating coals from the charcoal kiln in order to create golden charcoal, which surpassed black and white charcoal. He thought he could possibly create a better sword if he had that special charcoal. However, he never succeeded, not even once. Collecting legends and rumors, he tried countless methods. However, he couldn't obtain the golden charcoal. He didn't want to give up. It was the only obsession left in the final days of his life. While he was burning away his time, that boy came to visit him. Raon Zighart. He'd been breathing with the furnace's flame from the day he'd met him. The flame that had been stopped for decades started to burn like a savage beast. It was the first time. The flame had never reacted, nor had it ever increased its firepower before. Thinking that something might change, he'd allowed Raon to stay next to him. However, he didn't have high expectations. Because this is a hellfire. The kiln's heat was so severe that even a veteran blacksmith avoided it. Some blacksmiths had come to him with the intention of helping, but a few days was enough to make them slip away. The boy was drenched in cold sweat and withstood the pain by biting his lip. However, he kept visiting him every day and sat in front of the furnace. At first, he was clearly unable to focus on his cultivation because of the heat coming from the ground. The second day was the same, he kept biting his lip while trembling from the heat. 3 days, 4 days, a week, a month, 3 months. Raon kept visiting the kiln without missing a single day. And today, the fire inside the furnace burned fiercely, as if it was reacting to Raon breathing in and out, and the heat inside the kiln had become many times stronger. Inhale. He dominated the flame in that space, as if he'd become the embodiment of the fire. This is. Vulcan suddenly realized it was an important opportunity for him. Not an opportunity to create a new charcoal, but an opportunity for him to live as a blacksmith once again. Huff. With extreme concentration, he maintained the firepower in the furnace. Blowing and fanning, he kept repeating every action that could grow the fire. The flame was alive. The transparent flame at the center was increasing its firepower while erasing the weak and murky ones. However, something unexpected happened. Frost fell from Raon's body, which should have been sweating from the charcoal kiln's heat. What is this? He looked around in a panic, but the ice was nowhere else to be found. That ice kept spreading throughout his body, and his golden hair ended up freezing. What should I do? Raon's body was trembling. He understood he wasn't in a good condition, but he didn't know what to do. He knew he shouldn't touch him at a time like this, but he thought Raon would die if left alone. Hey! You! Stop! As Vulcan was about to extend his hand in order to wake Raon up, Rimmer appeared. He was literally moving like the wind. Rimmer! What are you doing? He is going to die. There's nothing we can do right now. Rimmer shook his head. He frowned and stared at Raon, who was shaking even more now. If he receives the slightest impact from the outside, he will cough up blood and die. Is that the ice you talked about before? Yes. He was born with that ice in his body. That's. Vulcan bit his lip as the sight tugged at his heartstrings. Such a young child. He felt sorry that a child still wet behind the ears was born with a coldness severe enough to erase the furnace's heat. At the same time, he felt proud of the boy that had managed to withstand it until now. He wanted to help somehow. Is there anything we can do? No. It will be dangerous if you touch anything at all. Rimmer's expression was unusually serious. His fist was clenched, and his eyes didn't move away from Raon. The two of them kept staring at the ice covering Raon's entire body in complete silence. He is really going to die at this rate. Anything. Wait. Raon just moved. Rimmer's expression contained hope. He snorted as he kept staring at Raon. What? What do you mean, huh? Vulcan turned his head. The flame from the furnace had suddenly grown fiercer. Rumble. The flame came from the furnace, surging around the entire kiln. The kiln's clay enclosure had exploded, causing the tremendous heat to fill the air. Boom! It was difficult to breathe due to the immense heat. Huff! He lowered his body because of the heat, the type of which the continent's blacksmith had never felt before, but the heat didn't last. Whoosh! That was because the heat was being absorbed by Raon, rotating in a spiral towards him. With the tremendous amount of heat being condensed into him, the coldness covering his entire body melted. Whap! A red flame burned along Raon's body. No, the flame wasn't red. It was golden. Reflecting the golden daybreak rising over the eastern mountain, a golden flame burst forth. Despite being engulfed in a golden flame, Raon didn't stop cultivating. He kept absorbing the heat from not only his surroundings, but also the entirety of the North Grave Mountain. Rumble. As the sun fully showed its majestic light, the light pouring out from Raon started to grow faint and he opened his eyes. Spark. Vulcan, who met his eyes, swallowed. A thrill running up from his toes pierced his brain. A dark golden light. The golden light, containing the daybreak's light, was burning in his eyes.